Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a profoundly important topic in psychology, avoidant personality disorder, AVPD. This goes far beyond mere shyness. It's a deep-rooted emotional and behavioral pattern that can trap people in cycles of fear, isolation, and low self-worth. Maybe you've thought of yourself as just introverted, but if you often feel not good enough, avoid opportunities or relationships out of fear of rejection, it might be time to take a closer look. This video doesn't offer diagnosis or replace mental health professionals. Instead, it offers a journey of self-discovery. We'll explore how to identify subtle signs that may be shaping your life and relationships. The insights are drawn from the original work by Psych2 Goa, trusted voice in popular psychology, and are shared here under fair use for educational and analytical purposes only. Stick around until the end of the video. We're not just listing symptoms, we'll broaden the perspective. How would a securely attached person understand and handle these behaviors? How can we stop abandoning our own worth in the face of avoidant tendencies? And if you or someone close to you shows these signs, how can you approach the situation with deeper understanding and compassion? If you're passionate about psychology, healing, and personal growth, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. When we talk about avoidant personality disorder, AVPD, one central trait casts a shadow over every area of life, an intense fear of rejection. This isn't just ordinary shyness or occasional anxiety about what others think. It's a persistent, internalized fear that you'll never be truly accepted, never be enough, and that revealing your true self will inevitably lead to being cast aside. This fear doesn't just live in the heart, it shapes how someone with AVPD sees the world through a lens of criticism and anticipated failure. Even when none is present, I share this not to pathologize anyone, but with deep sincerity and respect to say, this pain is real, and it deserves to be heard. If you've ever felt your heart race just to share your opinion, delayed a great opportunity for fear of being seen as incompetent, or felt alone in a crowd, you already understand part of what this disorder means. But from the lens of someone with secure attachment, this reaction, though understandable, is not inevitable. A securely attached person still feels the sting of rejection, but they don't let it define their worth. They might say, it hurts not to be received, but that doesn't mean I'm unworthy. They continue to show up, express themselves, and connect because they know their value isn't dependent on others' approval, but on their honest presence with themselves. I believe every persona, no matter how much fear, avoidance, or self-doubt they've lived with, can learn to trust themselves again. And that doesn't start with forcing courage, but by allowing yourself to show up, scared, and still move forward. That is the essence of self-respect, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to abandon yourself in it. So if you see yourself in these AVPD traits, don't rush to shame or judgment. Hear it as a signal there's a part of you calling for healing and understanding, and that healing can begin with a simple truth. I've lived in fear of rejection, but I am worthy of love without needing to be perfect. But the impact doesn't stop at the fear of rejection. When that fear dominates the mind long enough, it quietly suffocates one of our most basic human needs, connection. And this brings us to the second sign of AVPD, a lack of close relationships. If you've ever felt awkward, self-conscious, or even anxious around people, especially those closest to you, you understand a piece of what someone with AVPD lives through. It's not that they don't want love or connection. Quite the opposite, they deeply crave it. But because of past experiences of rejection, hurt, or chronic self-doubt, they gradually learn to withdraw from intimacy. They avoid eye contact, sidestep invitations, and decline opportunities for closeness, not out of indifference, but out of fear that letting someone in will expose their flaws. These looping questions create distance where connection could have bloomed. And here's the paradox. The more they isolate, the more they long for connection, yet the more terrifying it becomes to reach out. It's a painful cycle. And within that cycle, what's often lost is self-respect. A securely attached person doesn't assume that distance equals rejection. They might think, maybe that person is just busy, Or, if this relationship matters, I can reach out without fear of judgment. In other words, they don't let fear lead, they let self-worth lead. If you found yourself avoiding closeness not because you don't need anyone, but because you're not sure you'd be accepted, I want you to hear this. That doesn't make you wrong or weak. It just means you've learned to protect yourself in the only way you knew how. But protecting yourself doesn't have to mean isolation. Sometimes it means daring to connect again. Even in small ways, it means breaking the silence. It means letting others see your whole self, the parts you're proud of and the parts still healing. Because connection doesn't require perfection. It only asks for honest presence. And within those moments of avoiding intimacy, we begin to see something deeper. When a person withdraws from connection, they're not just turning away from others, they're turning away from themselves. They doubt their intuition, their feelings, and even their capacity to be received. And slowly, fear seeps into more than just relationships. It shapes how they live, choose, and face growth. This leads us to the third sign of AVPD, avoiding risk and growth opportunities. This isn't just being cautious or risk. Averse, it's a kind of psychological paralysis, where every opportunity feels like a trap for failure. People with AVPD may retreat even when faced with something they once dreamed of, simply because the thought of, what if I'm not good enough, overwhelms them. A promotion offer, a new job opportunity, a chance to collaborate, these don't excite them. They trigger a wave of dread. What if I mess this up? What if they realize I'm not capable? But that belief is distorted by fear. From the lens of a securely attached person, failure isn't a verdict on worth, its feedback for growth. A self-respecting individual might say, I might fail, but that doesn't make me less. They're willing to try not because they're certain of success, but because they know their value isn't tied to the outcome, but to the courage it takes to show up. And that courage doesn't always look bold. Sometimes it looks like applying for a role while your heart races, speaking up in a meeting with a trembling voice, signing up to relearn a skill, even knowing you won't master it on day one. These small acts are profound. They resist the inner critic that whispers, you'll never be enough. I believe we've all been held back by fear at some point. But if you're reading this, perhaps like me, you're learning to live a life where you no longer avoid yourself, a life where you can say, I'm scared, but I'm still moving forward. If you recognize that you've missed opportunities because of fear of failure, know this. You're not broken. You simply learn to protect yourself by shrinking. But today, you can learn again how to step in, how to fail without shame, how to rise without self-blame. Because opportunity doesn't seek perfection. It seeks those willing to show up exactly as they are. And here's the irony. The more opportunities someone avoids, the more doors they close out of fear of failure, the more deeply they internalize the belief that they don't belong. Someone who avoids risk gradually loses faith in their own abilities and starts labeling themselves as the outsider, the one who doesn't fit in. And so, they step into the next pattern. Excessive shyness. This is not the same as being introverted. An introvert may enjoy selective, intentional social interaction, but someone with AVPD lives in a state of constant social anxiety. It's not people they fear, it's the gaze, the imagined judgment that may or may not exist in the minds of others, even when they long for closeness, for conversation, for warmth. The fear of being judged gets there first. I want to pause here and speak to you, whoever is reading this, and say, if you've felt this, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not too sensitive. You've simply learned to protect yourself so well that the defense has become your second skin. But defense doesn't mean you don't belong. Your presence, even if shaky, even if unsure, is still worthy, just like anyone else's. A securely attached person may also feel nervous entering a new space, but they don't equate that anxiety with their identity. They don't assume that nervousness means they don't belong. Instead, they acknowledge it, breathe through it, and keep going, because they trust they have a place in the world, even without perfection. And so do you. You have the right to show up even if you're not confident yet. You have the right to be heard even if your voice trembles. You have the right to connect not because you've earned it, but because you are human. And humans need each other. The journey from shyness to presence is not an overnight transformation. It's a series of small steps, quiet but persistent. It's staying at the gathering instead of making an excuse to leave. It's messaging an old friend, not knowing how they'll respond. It's holding someone's gaze without turning away. That's the path of self-respect, not by forcing yourself to get over your shyness, but by acknowledging it and showing up anyway, knowing you still deserve to be here. And as we avoid risks and turn away from opportunities, no matter how small over time, it's not just our growth that's stifled. Our sense of identity begins to fade. We lose touch with what we love, what we're good at, what lights us up, because every time we try to express it, fear pulls us back. This doesn't only affect our actions, it deeply shapes our emotions, especially in social interactions. Which brings us to the fourth sign of AVPD. Excessive shyness and social inhibition. Unlike introverts, who simply need solitude to recharge, those with AVPD often want to connect, but feel paralyzed by fear before they even begin. They might imagine dozens of scenarios where they're judged, misunderstood, or dismissed and conclude, better not go. Their heart might crave closeness, but their mind becomes a gatekeeper whispering, what if you say the wrong thing? What if they think you're weird? But here's what's crucial. People with AVPD don't lack communication skills. They lack the sense of safety to be themselves while communicating. They're not short on thoughts to share. They're short on belief that what they say matters, that they don't need to be flawless to belong in the conversation. From the lens of secure attachment, shyness may show up, but it doesn't have to define how one lives. A self-respecting person won't berate themselves for feeling awkward. They might say, I feel nervous talking to new people. But that doesn't mean I'm strange. I still have the right to be here even imperfectly. And that's the turning point. Showing up, even if imperfectly. Courage isn't about always saying the right thing. It's about not abandoning yourself in the discomfort. Self-respect doesn't mean forcing openness before you're ready, but it also doesn't let fear rule forever. It means listening to yourself, honoring the discomfort, and taking small steps to rebuild the confidence that fear tried to erase. If you've ever felt anxious to start a conversation, stayed quiet because you didn't know what to say, or held back despite having so much in your heart, I want you to know this, that shyness doesn't diminish your worth. It's simply a signal that a part of you is still healing, still seeking reassurance, still learning to feel safe enough to shine. No one was born to be swallowed by silence, not even you. You might be shy, but you still have a voice. And you deserve to be heard, even if your voice is still finding its strength imperfectly. Courage isn't about always saying the right thing. It's about not abandoning yourself in the discomfort. Self-respect doesn't mean forcing openness before you're ready, but it also doesn't let fear rule forever. It means listening to yourself, honoring the discomfort, and taking small steps to rebuild the confidence that fear tried to erase. If you've ever felt anxious to start a conversation, stayed quiet because you didn't know what to say, or held back despite having so much in your heart, I want you to know this, that shyness doesn't diminish your worth. It's simply a signal that a part of you is still healing, still seeking reassurance, still learning to feel safe enough to shine. No one was born to be swallowed by silence, not even you. You might be shy, but you still have a voice, and you deserve to be heard, even if your voice is still finding its strength. And when someone is too shy to speak, too afraid to show up, they don't just lose connection with others, they start to disconnect from their own inner worth. They no longer see themselves as someone trying, learning, growing, but only through a distorted mirror. Always wrong, always behind, always not enough. And that brings us to the fifth sign of AVPD, severe low self-esteem. Low self-esteem in AVPD isn't just about lacking confidence. It's a chronic belief system where every small failure, every distant glance, every piece of feedback becomes twisted into evidence for a painful inner truth. I'm not worthy. Someone with AVPD might see others succeed and instantly conclude, I could never be like them. Even when praised, they might not believe it because their mind is already set on, there's nothing good about me. AVPD often see themselves as inadequate, socially incompetent, and fundamentally flawed. They carry shame not because they truly lack value, but because they've internalized past rejection. Maybe it was criticism in childhood, exclusion at school, or just growing up in an emotionally unsafe environment. These experiences quietly become the roots of a distorted belief system. I'm not good enough to be loved. But that's not the truth. That's a story in need of rewriting. From a secure attachment lens, people also fail, get criticized, and feel pain, but they don't let it become their identity. They might say, I made a mistake, but that's not all of who I am. They clearly distinguish between self-worth and performance, between feeling rejected and the reality of being lovable. Most importantly, they know how to stand by themselves, even when no one else does. If you've ever looked in the mirror and couldn't find anything worth loving, felt trapped in loops of comparison and self-judgment, believed you needed to be smarter, more attractive, or more successful just to be worthy of love, please know you are not alone. But also, remember, you don't need to be perfect to be lovable. You just need to be honest with the pain, with the journey, and with yourself. Self-respect doesn't come from being the best. It comes from knowing that even when you're imperfect, you are still worthy. Even when others don't see it, you don't turn your back on yourself. Even if the past made you doubt that truth, you still have the right to start again from within. No one deserves to live a life under their own harsh gaze. And if you have for too long, today might be the day you begin looking at yourself with a softer lens. You don't need forced positivity, just one honest moment. I'm still here, still breathing, still trying, and maybe I'm not as unworthy as I once believed. When someone has lived too long in self-doubt, they don't just question their worth, they begin reshaping who they are to fit what others expect. They live in a constant state where every action must be acceptable, every word must be measured, and every authentic feeling must be hidden. Deep down, they fear that if they show their true selves, they'll inevitably be rejected. And that's when we enter the sixth sign of AVPD, avoiding conflict and people-pleasing. AVPD often avoid all forms of conflict, even the smallest ones. A bit of criticism, a differing opinion, an honest conversational are perceived as threats, to be disliked, to be judged, to be dismissed. So they choose the safest option. Agree, stay silent, endure, and keep others happy even if it comes at the cost of their own well-being. But this safety often leads them into unhealthy dynamics. When someone believes they must be agreeable, easygoing, and compliant to be accepted, they easily become self-sacrificing. They may agree to things they don't support, participate in things that drain them, or suppress their needs, boundaries, and values just to maintain the appearance of harmony. Over time, they lose sight of where they end and others begin. But the truth is, peace is not always love, and compliance is not always kindness. A securely attached person understands that conflict isn't something to avoid at all costs. They know they can disagree and still be respected. They can say no without fearing rejection because they understand real closeness doesn't come from constant agreement. It comes from honest expression. A self-respecting person doesn't please others by abandoning themselves. They don't stay silent just to keep the peace. They choose to honor themselves even in how they relate to others because they know that if love requires self-erasure, it's not the kind of love worth keeping. If you've ever felt the pressure to always be nice, agreeable, or not cause problems, if you've feared that having your own voice might cost you connection, you're not weak. You just learned a survival strategy. If I please, I'll be allowed to stay. But today, I want to remind you, you don't have to abandon yourself to be loved. You can learn to say no without shame. You can learn to set boundaries without guilt. You can learn to keep your kindness without losing your truth. Because real kindness doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from being honest and courageous in how we show up. And you deserve that kind of love, the kind where you get to be freely yourself. You see, avoidance, whether of conflict, intimacy, risk, or your own true feelings, is not your nature. It's a strategy you learned when safety was missing. But now, you get to learn again not by forcing yourself to be strong, but by gently walking alongside yourself as a true friend would. The signs of AVPD we've explored together, from fear of rejection, lack of close relationships, risk avoidance, excessive shyness, low self-esteem, to people-pleasing air, not sentences. They're invitations. What inside you is asking for healing? What made you believe you weren't enough? I didn't write this to label or diagnose. I wrote this to remind you that you're not alone. There are many who carry wounds like yours, and the quiet miracle is, wounds can heal if we stay with ourselves in honesty and compassion. If you recognize yourself in these words, know this: no one is born ashamed, afraid, or withdrawn. These patterns were learned from experience, and what is learned can be unlearned. With the right support, patient practice, and kindness toward yourself, you can learn to live again, this time not in avoidance, but in true presence. And if you're already on that journey, I hope you walk it with steadiness and self-respect, because you deserve a life where you are loved, not for pleasing others, but for simply being you. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this video. If you found this meaningful, please share it with someone who may need it. And if you'd like to keep exploring psychology, healing, and self-growth with me, don't forget to follow so you won't miss what's next.